The morning I lost my life began like any other. I had worked the third shift at Manufactorum Terra's for 7 years, 3 months, and 16 days. The count mattered, not because we expected reward or recognition, but because numbers gave structure to the shapeless blur of existence. 7 years, 3 months, and 16 days of standing at Station 47. Feeding raw plastile into the insatiable maw of pattern generator Kappa 9. 7 years of the same ritual. Wake at the 19th hour, consume ration paste, walk 14 minutes to the factory floor, stand, feed, and listen to the machine's endless grinding song. The factory stretched beyond sight in both directions, a cathedral of industry where 10,000 souls perform their daily genuflection to the machine god. Steam hissed from overhead pipes in irregular bursts, creating a percussion that synchronized with our movements. The air carried the sharp tang of metal shavings and recycled breath. My hands, calloused from handling rough plastil sheets, and my back, slightly hunched to match the station's height, had long adapted to the work. Station 47 sat in the heart of production line Alpha 7. Flanked by identical workstations manned by interchangeable workers. To my left stood Jorik, a wiry man whose nervous habit of counting aloud under his breath blended with the machine's drone. To my right was Mailer, her silence so absolute, I sometimes wondered if she'd forgotten speech entirely. We never spoke of our lives before the Manufactorum. There seemed little point. The work consumed all thought and energy, leaving no room for memory or hope. At the same moment, each shift, the overseer's voice crackled through the voxcasters. Production quota stands at 97% of target. Unacceptable. Increase output by 12%, or face ration reduction. The threat held no malice, only the cold certainty of bureaucratic process. For 3 weeks, we'd heard the same warning. Quotas always rose. They never fell. My body had adapted completely to this rhythm. My hands guided plastile into the machine's intake, while my mind drifted through familiar, fleeting thoughts. Sometimes, I recalled the taste of real meat, though the memory felt vague, possibly false. Other times, I imagined colors brighter than the Manufactorum's rust-orange glow. These thoughts flickered like distant ships on a dark horizon, briefly visible before vanishing into the void. The work wasn't difficult, just endless. The machine demanded plastile sheets fed at precise intervals, neither too fast nor too slow. Too fast, and the pattern generator jammed, triggering work stoppage and punishment detail. Too slow, and the quota slipped, with the same consequences. 7 years had honed my rhythm. Feed, count 3 seconds. Feed, count 3 seconds. The pattern never wavered. Around me, 9,999 other workers performed their own variations of this dance. The sounds, metal clanging against metal, steam releasing pressure, conveyor, AU, belts ferrying finished products to distant shipping bays, and the occasional curse when someone broke rhythm and earned a shock from their compliance collar, formed a hypnotic symphony of industrial devotion. These sounds were reality itself. I cannot say I was unhappy during those years. Happiness seemed a concept from another universe, irrelevant to survival. I was fed, housed in Worker Barracks Delta 7, Level 3, Cell 941, and equipped with regulation coveralls, boots, and identification tags. My existence had structure and purpose. As the daily prayer reminded us, the Imperium provided, and we gave our labor gladly. At the shift's midpoint, the prayer echoed through every Vox speaker, and 10,000 voices joined in mechanical recitation. Blessed is the machine, for it serves the Emperor. Blessed is the worker, for we serve the machine. Blessed is our service, for through toil comes redemption. The words, worn smooth by repetition, had lost meaning, but gained the comfort of routine. I spoke them without thought, as natural as breathing. My cell in the worker barracks measured 2 meters by 3, containing a sleeping cot, a small storage compartment, and a waste receptacle. The unpainted rockcrete walls bore stains from decades of habitation. A single lumen strip provided light when needed. I lived alone, a privilege earned through years of flawless compliance and production. Most workers shared cells with 3 or 4 others. Solitude was a luxury in the Underhive. The food sufficed. Ration paste delivered essential calories and nutrients, flavored weekly with chemical additives. Monday's artificial fruit essence, Tuesday's synthetic meat, and Wednesday through Sunday's subtle variations, often indistinguishable. I preferred the unflavored base paste, finding the artificial flavors more unsettling than blandness. Dispensed by nutrition servitors from vast vats, the paste sustained us through automated feeding stations. Recreation time lasted 2 hours per cycle. Most workers spent it in communal areas, playing games with worn cards or dice crafted from scrap metal. Some listened as the more educated read from approved texts, technical manuals, or devotional works. I preferred returning to my cell, lying still, and listening to the hive's ambient sounds, rats scurrying through wall spaces, water dripping from corroded pipes, and distant machinery humming with tireless purpose. Even in the industrial sector's depths, life followed ancient patterns. Sleep came easily, ensured by physical exhaustion and the barracks' darkness. Dreams, when they occurred, were simple, walking through vast spaces under unfamiliar skies, or seeing faces, nameless, lost to time, but warm. These faded quickly upon waking, leaving only a faint sense of something missed, but not mourned. After 7 years, my routine was flawless. I knew the exact number of steps from my cell to the factory floor, the maintenance servitor's predictable schedules to avoid, and the optimal timing for uncrowded washing facilities. Every aspect of life had been distilled into efficient patterns, minimizing friction and maximizing energy for work. Change seemed impossible. The Manufactorum had stood for centuries before me and would endure long after. Workers too old or infirm were quietly reassigned, their fates unspoken. New workers, often young failures from the upper levels, filled vacant stations, learning the rhythm or vanishing. I had no reason to expect change. The Imperium was vast beyond comprehension, and my place within it was smaller than a grain of sand. I was a worker at Station 47 on production line Alpha 7, in Manufactorum Turs of Hive Turs, on a world whose name I'd forgotten. My universe consisted of the factory, the barracks, and the corridors between them. This seemed not just acceptable, but natural. The morning everything changed began with the same ritual awakening. The harsh tone of the shift klaxon pierced my sleep at precisely the 19th hour. I rose immediately, my muscles responding with the ingrained precision of years. First came the regulation coveralls, then the boots, and finally the identification tags around my neck. The small mirror above the storage compartment reflected a face I barely recognized, etched by industrial air and marked by subtle scars from prolonged exposure to chemical processes. The walk to the factory floor traced its familiar path, down 3 levels via the cargo lifts, through Corridor Gamma Prime, past the shrine to the machine god, where incense burned ceaselessly before an ancient cogitator housing. Left at Junction 7, right at Junction 12, and straight through the final checkpoint where servitors scanned our tags with mechanical precision. The same route, every day, for 7 years, 3 months, and 16 days. Station 47 awaited, unchanged from the 8 hours prior. Plastile sheets sat in neat stacks beside the machine's intake. The pattern generator hummed with quiet readiness, its control panel displaying the familiar green lights of proper function. Everything was in place, primed for another cycle of service to the Imperium. Jorik had already begun, muttering numbers under his breath: 47, 48, 49, 50. His count destined to reach thousands by shift's end. Mailer stood silent at her station, moving with the mechanical precision that had earned her the title of Alpha 7's most efficient worker for 3 consecutive years. The Overseer's platform remained empty, though surveillance servitors tracked our every move with unblinking vigilance. The first hour unfolded as expected. Feed the machine, count 3 seconds, feed again, count 3 seconds. The rhythm synced with my heartbeat, a meditative flow that dissolved time. Steam hissed from overhead pipes, and the pattern generator's grinding song provided steady accompaniment. A familiar ache settled into my lower back, signaling my body's adjustment to the day's labor. It was during the second hour that the disruption began. A new sound cut through the factory's constant hum, like a discordant note in a familiar symphony. Marching feet, synchronized with military precision, echoing through corridors meant for industrial traffic. The sound grew closer, joined by voices barking orders in sharp, authoritative tones. Workers glanced up from their stations, breaking rhythm for the first time in memory. The Overseer appeared on his platform ahead of schedule, flanked by unfamiliar figures in the dark blue uniforms of the Planetary Defense Force, their silver insignia marking them as officers of high rank. Their presence transformed the factory floor into something alien and menacing. Workers, once confident in their stations, now seemed small and vulnerable. The Vox speakers crackled with an announcement that reshaped everything. Attention, all workers. By decree of the planetary governor, in accordance with Imperial military conscription protocols, the following individuals will report immediately to Processing Station Alpha for induction into military service. Names echoed through the vast space, each one a blow, tearing another soul from the safety of routine. Called workers stepped away from their machines, moving with the same mechanical obedience they'd shown to production quotas, but their faces betrayed fear, confusion, and the dawning realization that their predictable world was collapsing. Jorik Ellen, Station 46, Alpha 7. The thin man beside me froze mid-count, his mouth agape, his familiar litany replaced by silence. Mailer Korth, Station 48, Alpha 7. The quiet woman to my right stepped back, her flawless efficiency now irrelevant. In 3 years, I'd never heard her speak, but now she whispered something too faint to catch. The list continued, names from every section, every level of skill and experience. Veterans of decades stood alongside newcomers of mere months. The selection followed no discernible pattern, not age, not performance, not health. The choices felt random, dictated by calculations beyond my grasp. Marcus Kellyan, Station 47, Alpha 7. My own name hit like a revelation. After 7 years, 3 months, and 16 days of invisible existence, I had been noticed. The machine at Station 47 suddenly felt foreign, as if I'd never known it. The plastil sheets I'd been about to feed belonged to another life. I stepped back, following the others, the movement a violation of the natural order. For years, I had stood in this spot, performing this function. Now, I was walking away, and someone else would take my place. A thought heavier than I could fathom. Processing Station Alpha occupied an unfamiliar section of the factory. We were herded through corridors leading away from the production floor, past administrative offices where bureaucrats managed the endless paperwork of industrial efficiency. The walls here were painted regulation green, not rust orange, and the air carried new scents, cleaning solutions, ink, and fear. The processing station was a large room filled with metal tables and scanning equipment. PDF officers moved between tables with practiced efficiency, reducing humans to lists of capabilities and deficiencies: height, weight, health, literacy, mechanical aptitude. Each measurement was recorded with the dispassionate precision of inventory management. I was assigned to Table 17, overseen by a woman whose uniform identified her as Sergeant Major Vex. Her weathered face suggested years of processing countless conscripts. She spoke without looking up from her data slate, her tone demanding instant compliance. Full name? Marcus Kellion. Age? I paused, time in the Manufactorum measured by shifts, not years. 28 standard years. Previous military service? None. Specialized skills? Factory work. Pattern generator operation. She made notations, occasionally glancing up to assess some physical trait. The questions stretched on. Family status? None. Education? Minimal. Health issues? Few. Each answer narrowing my future. The medical examination followed. A servitor equipped with scanning devices conducted tests I didn't understand, measuring responses and recording data on unseen organs and systems. The process was as impersonal as all imperial bureaucracy, reducing individuals to cataloged components. Physically suitable for standard infantry service, the servitor announced in its mechanical monotone. Recommended assignment, frontline combat unit, siege warfare specialization. The words meant nothing to me then. The Imperial Guard was a distant concept from propaganda and posters, far removed from factory life. The examination continued with tests of basic knowledge and reaction time, all conducted with the same indifferent efficiency. Around me, other workers underwent identical processing. Some were deemed unfit for combat and assigned to support roles. Others were marked for technical training. A few, rejected for health reasons, returned to their stations with visible relief. Most, like me, were funneled toward the Imperial war machine. The entire process took less than 4 hours. 4 hours to dismantle a life built over 7 years, to redirect a human being from industrial production to military service. The efficiency was remarkable in its way, a testament to the Imperium's ability to mobilize resources when necessity demanded. Individual preferences and attachments were irrelevant, obstacles to be processed away. By the end of the processing, we were no longer workers. We had become conscripts, assigned identification numbers and basic classification codes that would shape our immediate future. I was now Conscript 4092, Delta Infantry Classification, pending assignment. The name Marcus Kellion lingered, but it felt like a relic of someone else's life. The final stage of processing involved issuing basic military equipment, a cloth bag containing regulation undergarments, a water bottle, a small eating kit, and a booklet titled Basic Military Doctrine for New Conscripts. The booklet, printed on cheap, smudging paper, outlined military hierarchy, basic orders, and simple diagrams of proper standing positions. We also received new identification tags to replace our worker badges. These were heavier, stamped with our conscript numbers and service details, and made of a different metal. They hung around my neck, a constant reminder that my old identity had been erased. The officer overseeing final processing, a captain whose name I never learned, addressed our group with the practiced efficiency of someone who had delivered the same speech countless times. "You are now property of the Imperial Guard," he declared. "Your previous lives are ended. Your service begins immediately. You will be transported to Training Facility Gamma for basic combat preparation, after which you will be assigned to active units based on military necessity. Questions will not be answered. Compliance is expected and will be enforced." The speech lasted less than 2 minutes. 2 minutes to confirm that everything familiar had been stripped away, replaced by obligations I couldn't yet comprehend. We stood in formation, 53 former workers, now transformed into military resources, awaiting instructions that would decide our survival. Within an hour, the transport arrived, a massive ground vehicle designed for efficiency, not comfort, with bench seating along both sides and no windows. Its engine produced a deep rumble that stifled conversation, likely by design. Conscripts were not meant to discuss their situation or form bonds that might disrupt military discipline. I took a seat near the front, between a young man who had worked in the upper hive's atmospheric processing systems and an older woman whose scarred hands hinted at experience with hazardous machinery. Neither spoke during the journey, and I found myself equally disinclined to talk. The reality of our transformation demanded silent contemplation. Words felt inadequate. As the transport climbed toward the upper hive levels, the manufactorum faded behind us. Through a small vision port near the driver's compartment, I glimpsed unfamiliar sectors, residential areas with actual houses, not barrack cells, commercial districts where goods were sold, not produced, and administrative zones managing the hive's complex governance. These sights stirred an unexpected emotion, not longing, exactly, for I had never coveted another life, but a recognition that other ways of existence were possible, and I had been blind to them. For 7 years, I had accepted factory work as the natural order. Now, seeing alternatives, that acceptance felt like a kind of ignorance. The 6-hour journey to Training Facility Gamma followed highways that ascended through the hive's levels, past industrial zones and residential sectors, through countless checkpoints where bored guards verified our documentation. The higher we climbed, the cleaner the air became, though it never lost the recycled tang of hive life. Training Facility Gamma sat on the hive's exterior surface, a complex of low, functional buildings encircled by high walls topped with razor wire. Guard towers provided overlapping fields of fire, ensuring total surveillance and control. The architecture prioritized efficiency over comfort or beauty. Processing here was even more thorough than at the factory. We were stripped, decontaminated, and issued poorly fitting but functional Imperial Guard fatigues, rough, green canvas uniforms, stiff boots requiring breaking in, and equipment belts that sat awkwardly on hips accustomed to worker coveralls. Personal possessions were confiscated and stored, to be returned upon completion of service, a policy that felt optimistic given the Imperial Guard's rumored survival rates. My few belongings from the manufactorum, a worn prayer book, faded photographs of people I could no longer name, and a mechanical timepiece that had been my father's, vanished into a locker labeled with my conscript number. The barracks housed 60 conscripts in 3 long rows of bunks, each with a storage compartment underneath. The space felt larger than my old cell, but the presence of so many others created a new kind of confinement. Privacy was non-existent. Every sound, movement, and habit was exposed to constant scrutiny. My bunk, near the center of the middle row, was surrounded by conscripts from the hive's industrial sectors, a water reclamation worker above me, an air circulation system technician across the aisle, and a former food processing worker to my left, whose nutritional knowledge would later prove useful. We were a cross-section of the hive's productive capacity, now repurposed for destruction. The first night in the military barracks was sleepless. The sounds were wrong. No familiar industrial hum, just voices, breathing, and the rustle of unfamiliar fabrics. The air carried the scent of too many bodies and military-grade cleaning solutions. Even the darkness felt alien, pierced by safety lights and occasional flashes from patrol searchlights through barred windows. Lying on the thin mattress, I struggled to process the day's events. 18 hours ago, I had been a worker with a defined role and predictable future. Now, I was a conscript facing training for skills, meant for killing and dying. The transition felt unreal, yet the coarse canvas of the military-issue blanket against my skin was undeniable proof. Around me, conscripts coped in their own ways. Some wept quietly into their pillows, mourning lost routines. Others lay still, conserving energy for the trials ahead. A few whispered about homes and families, forging brief connections that military discipline would soon discourage. Fear was universal, manifesting differently in each person. Fear of the unknown training awaiting us, fear of the combat assignments to follow, fear of death in service to an Imperium that had only noticed us to demand our sacrifice. The fear was rational, but offered no comfort or guidance. Sleep came eventually, born of exhaustion rather than peace. Dreams, when they came, were chaotic blends of factory routine and military imagery from propaganda posters. I stood at Station 47, feeding ammunition into unfamiliar weapons. I marched through corridors that led to battlefields instead of production lines. My uniform shifted between worker coveralls and soldier fatigues without logic. Morning arrived with the harsh blare of wake-up klaxons, reminiscent of factory shift changes, but more aggressive. The conscripts stirred with varying alertness, some rising instantly, others needing repeated prompting from those already adapting to the demand for rapid response. The barracks buzzed as 59 people dressed, washed, and prepared simultaneously. The communal washing facilities offered cold water, harsh soap, and no privacy. Polished metal mirrors, not glass, reflected distorted faces, making everyone look unfamiliar. I studied my reflection, searching for the factory worker I had been in the conscript I was becoming. Breakfast was served in a large dining hall adjacent to the barracks, the food similar to factory rations, but presented differently. Protein paste, carbohydrate wafers, vitamin supplements, and a bitter drink that might have been stimulant tea, all served on metal trays by staff moving with military precision. We ate in silence, following the example of earlier conscripts who had learned the unspoken rules. Training sergeants patrolled, watching for insubordination or excessive familiarity, reinforcing that we were components of a military machine, not individuals forming bonds. The training staff arrived as we finished eating, 3 sergeants and a lieutenant, all bearing the weathered look of career soldiers who had survived long enough to earn training assignments. Their uniforms were perfectly maintained, their equipment showed signs of extensive use, and their bearings suggested competence earned through experience rather than classroom instruction. Lieutenant Herrick addressed our group with the same dispassionate efficiency that had marked every stage of military processing. "You are now beginning basic combat training," he said. "This training will last 6 weeks and will prepare you for assignment to active guard units. You will learn to follow orders without question. You will learn to use weapons effectively. You will learn to survive in combat environments. Many of you will not complete this training successfully. Those who fail will be reassigned to support roles or return to civilian status with appropriate notation in your permanent records." The speech continued with details about daily schedules, behavioral expectations, and the consequences of various infractions. The information was practical and clearly presented, but it carried an underlying message about the reality of our situation. We were raw material being shaped into useful tools, and those that failed to meet specifications would be discarded or repurposed. Training began immediately after the orientation. We were marched to an equipment shed where we received the tools of infantry warfare. Las rifles, simple but effective energy weapons that had armed guard units for millennia, along with power packs, cleaning kits, basic maintenance tools, and instruction manuals written in the simplified language used for conscripts with limited education. The las rifle felt strange in my hands, heavier than any factory tool, but balanced for quick aiming and firing. It was well worn, but meticulously maintained, bearing faint scratches and a small metal plate near the stock inscribed with what might have been names or unit markings. Sergeant Vex, the same woman who had processed me at the factory, handled basic weapons instruction. She demonstrated proper handling, loading procedures, safety protocols, and maintenance with the competence of someone seasoned by years in the field. Her explanations were clear and practical, emphasizing functionality over technical theory. "This las rifle will keep you alive if you maintain it properly and use it correctly," she explained, field stripping the weapon with practiced efficiency. "It will kill you if you treat it carelessly or ignore proper procedures. The choice is entirely yours, and you will live or die with the consequences." The first day of weapons training focused entirely on handling and maintenance. We learned to disassemble the las rifle completely, clean each component, identify signs of wear or damage, and reassemble it in proper working order. The process demanded attention to detail and manual dexterity, skills that translated seamlessly from factory work. I found the training surprisingly familiar, akin to operating the pattern generator. Follow specific procedures in sequence. Feed, count 3 seconds. Feed, count 3 seconds. Disassemble, clean, inspect, reassemble. The rhythm differed, but the principle of disciplined repetition was unchanged. Other aspects of training proved more challenging. Physical conditioning had been unnecessary in the factory beyond basic fitness for standing long hours and lifting moderate weights. Military demands required far more: running, climbing, carrying heavy loads over distances, and sustaining performance under stress. The training complex featured obstacle courses simulating combat environments, barriers to scale, trenches to navigate, and uneven ground requiring careful footing. We spent hours each day traversing these courses, first individually to master techniques, then in groups to build teamwork and coordination. My body adapted slowly. Muscles honed for factory tasks proved inadequate for military rigor, and familiar calluses were joined by new ones in strange places. The ache in my lower back gave way to pains in my shoulders, legs, and joints untested by such exertion. The other conscripts adapted at varying rates. Those from physically demanding civilian roles adjusted quickly, while upper Hive clerical workers struggled with basic standards. A few were transferred to support roles after failing minimum physical requirements, their military paths redirected before they'd truly begun. Combat training commenced in the second week. We learned basic infantry tactics, moving as a unit, using cover effectively, coordinating fire with squad mates. The instruction was practical, not theoretical, focused on survival techniques rather than grand strategy. Sergeant Korth, a thin man whose uniform bore ribbons from conflicts I'd never heard of, led most tactical sessions. He taught with a weary competence, born of witnessing the consequences of good and bad training in real combat. His lessons carried an urgency absent from the factory's production quotas. "The enemy will try to kill you," he explained during a session on defensive positioning. "This is not personal. It's not because they hate you, or because you have wronged them. It's because you wear the uniform of the Imperial Guard, and they serve the enemies of the Imperium. Your survival depends on killing them first, and more efficiently than they can kill you." The training weapons fired low-powered las bursts that stung without permanent injury. We practiced on static targets first, mastering stance, breathing, and trigger control. The las rifle's simple design made marksmanship straightforward, but consistency demanded practice and focus. I discovered an aptitude for it. 7 years of precise factory work had cultivated steady hands and an eye for detail. The rhythm of aimed fire echoed factory routines, repetitive movements executed to exacting standards. Target practice evolved, moving targets, fleeting silhouettes, shooting on the move, and firing under simulated stress with sergeants shouting orders and creating distractions to test our composure. The most difficult element was transitioning to human-shaped targets. Shifting from abstract shapes to humanoid silhouettes triggered unexpected psychological resistance. Even knowing they were harmless training aids, my mind recoiled at aiming at a human form and pulling the trigger. Sergeant Vex addressed my hesitation during an individual session. "The enemy will not hesitate to kill you," she said, watching me falter. "They will not consider your feelings or moral qualms. They will not give you time to overcome psychological barriers. If you cannot shoot at a training target that looks like a person, you will not be able to shoot at actual enemies when they are trying to end your life." She was right, of course. The training prepared us for realities civilian life hadn't anticipated. Taking human life was a required infantry skill, just as operating machinery had been for factory workers. Moral implications were irrelevant to survival. I overcame it by focusing on technicalities, sight alignment, breathing control, trigger squeeze, treating the target as a mechanical problem, not a person. This compartmentalization felt wrong, but it was necessary for passing training. Group tactics began in the third week. We were formed into squads of 10, with temporary leaders chosen based on individual performance. My squad drew from diverse Hive sectors, mirroring the Guard's practice of pulling soldiers from across Imperial society. Squad movement was more intricate than solo techniques, advancing with mutual support, coordinating suppressive fire, evacuating wounded while maintaining operations. Scenarios escalated in complexity, demanding simultaneous skills under time pressure. Communication emerged as a critical skill. Infantry warfare hinged on rapid, accurate coordination, enemy positions, ammunition status, casualties, tactical shifts. We drilled Vox equipment, hand signals, and verbal commands until they became instinctive. The Vox casters resembled factory models, but were built for two-way battlefield use and durability. Mastering protocol was vital. A misunderstood transmission could lead to friendly fire or deadly tactical errors. My squad leader was Conscript Yelena Voss, a former atmospheric system supervisor whose civilian leadership translated seamlessly to military duties. She made swift decisions under pressure and conveyed them clearly, forging our group into a cohesive unit rather than disparate individuals. The fourth week introduced us to heavier weapons and specialized equipment. Some conscripts showed aptitude for crew-served weapons like heavy bolters or mortars, while others were selected for training with demolitions or communications gear. These specializations would determine final assignments and influence survival chances in different combat scenarios. I was assigned to remain with standard infantry equipment, carrying a las rifle and basic combat gear, the most common role, reflecting my test scores and the Guard's constant need for reliable riflemen for standard infantry missions. Specialized roles were critical, but the backbone of Imperial military power remained the individual soldier with basic weapons, and the training to use them effectively. Equipment maintenance became a major focus during this period. We learned to repair damaged weapons under field conditions, improvise solutions when replacement parts were unavailable, and maintain functionality despite environmental stresses that exceeded design specifications. Training grew more realistic as we progressed. Live fire exercises with actual ammunition replaced low-powered training lasers, and combat scenarios included simulated casualties, forcing us to press on while managing wounded squad mates. Sleep deprivation and limited rations mimicked battlefield stress. During one grueling exercise, we assaulted a fortified position while carrying full equipment loads and operating on minimal sleep. The scenario featured obstacles requiring teamwork, enemy positions demanding coordinated fire, and casualties needing immediate medical attention while maintaining combat effectiveness. I moved with practiced efficiency, my actions automatic from repetition. The las rifle felt natural now, an extension of my body rather than an unfamiliar tool. My squad operated with collective purpose, each member instinctively fulfilling their role without needing detailed orders. The exercise succeeded, but the toll was evident in our physical and mental exhaustion. Several conscripts required medical attention for injuries, while others showed stress reactions needing monitoring. Instructors noted these outcomes with the same dispassionate efficiency that had defined our entire processing. Combat medical training dominated the fifth week. Every conscript learned basic first aid for battlefield injuries, using graphic training aids that replicated wounds common in infantry combat. We practiced stopping bleeding, treating shock, stabilizing fractures, and evacuating casualties under fire. The training was more unsettling than weapons instruction. Simulated wounds, even on mannequins with artificial blood, forced us to confront the visceral reality of warfare in ways target practice hadn't. The prospect of sustaining or treating such injuries became inescapable. I struggled initially with medical training. The sight of simulated wounds triggered nausea and anxiety, but necessity and repetition dulled these reactions. The skills were too vital for survival to abandon due to discomfort. Like shooting human-shaped targets, treating wounds required compartmentalizing technical tasks from emotional responses. The final week combined all skills and comprehensive combat exercises: infiltration, assault, defense, and withdrawal. These scenarios tested our ability to function as soldiers, not conscripts, responding to unexpected situations with trained instincts rather than panic. Something fundamental had shifted in how we moved and thought. Early hesitations vanished, replaced by automatic responses bypassing conscious choice. When targets appeared, we fired. When orders came, we obeyed. When casualties occurred, we pressed on. The transformation felt complete, though I couldn't pinpoint when it had occurred. Graduation from basic training was marked by a brief ceremony attended by officers whose names and ranks meant nothing to us. We stood in formation as speeches extolled duty, honor, and service to the Emperor, formal, impersonal words acknowledging our completion without celebrating individual achievement. We had become what the Imperium required: functional components for the war machine. Assignments were distributed immediately after, in sealed regulation envelopes with destination coordinates and reporting instructions. Some conscripts drew garrison postings on peaceful worlds, likely facing routine patrols and ceremonial duties. Others received orders for active combat zones with life expectancies measured in weeks. I opened my envelope with steady hands, despite knowing its contents would decide my fate. The orders were concise. Report to Subsector Command Station Gamma 77 for immediate reassignment to active combat unit. Transportation departs 0600 standard. No personal effects authorized. The destination was meaningless to me, but active combat unit signaled I'd be fighting within days or weeks. That final night in the training facility, I lay on my familiar bunk, grappling with the past 6 weeks. The worker at Station 47 seemed a figure from another lifetime, his routines and concerns alien. The conscript preparing to board the transport was someone I recognized, but didn't fully understand. Other conscripts spent the night differently. Some wrote letters to families, despite unreliable mail delivery to combat zones. Others shared stories of past lives, forging fleeting bonds soon to be broken by divergent assignments. A few lay silent, seeking peace before the unknown. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams blending factory and battlefield imagery. I stood at Station 47, feeding ammunition into self-firing weapons, marching through corridor to the trenches filled with bodies, my uniform shifting between coveralls and burial shrouds without logic. The transport arrived precisely at 600, a massive vehicle designed for interplanetary troop transport, prioritizing efficiency over comfort. Acceleration couches lined the rows, with minimal storage for personal gear, most of which had been issued at the facility and would ship separately. I was assigned to couch 17, row C, surrounded by conscripts whose destinations I'd never know. The woman beside me was bound for a penal legion, her orders marked with codes suggesting past infractions. The man across carried orders for an armored regiment, his vehicle aptitude earning a potentially safer role. The transport's engines produced a deep vibration, stifling conversation and sleep. We traveled in silence, each lost in thoughts of what awaited. The journey spanned several days, offering time to reflect on the transition from civilian to soldier to combatant. Through small viewports, I watched familiar stars fade as we moved toward uncharted regions. The transport followed trade routes connecting Imperial worlds, stopping at way stations for supplies and passenger transfers. Each stop distanced us from the familiar, drawing us closer to the vast conflicts of the 41st millennium. At the third way station, my orders were updated. Subsector Command Station Gamma 77 had been overrun by hostile Xenos forces. I was redirected to Forward Operating Base Tertius on Terra Prime, where guard units were conducting pacification operations against unspecified enemies. The change meant little practically, as I knew neither destination, but the casual reporting of strategic disasters suggested such shifts were routine. Entire worlds could fall during transit, with passenger manifests rerouted to wherever the Imperium needed reinforcement. The final leg was aboard a military cargo hauler, built for function alone, carrying troops, equipment, and supplies to combat zones. We were cargo, delivered with ruthless efficiency. Forward Operating Base Tertius occupied a plateau on Terra Prime's northern continent, surrounded by terrain offering clear fields of fire. The temporary but robust base featured prefabricated structures, quickly erected and easily dismantled as tactics demanded. Guard units rotated through, creating a constant flow of arrivals and departures. I was assigned to 2nd Platoon, Alpha Company, 43rd Cadian Infantry Regiment. The unit's designation was unfamiliar, but its soldiers carried a pride suggesting a storied history, with battle honors displayed prominently at the command post. My squad leader, Sergeant Corvain, a veteran with a scarred face and missing left eye, reviewed my training records with keen scrutiny. "Factory worker," he noted. "Good. You understand machinery and procedures. Combat is just machinery with different parts, and the procedures keep you breathing long enough to learn the job." The squad comprised 12 soldiers, including me, the newest replacement. The others, bonded by months to years of shared danger, viewed me as an outsider whose performance would determine acceptance or mere tolerance. Combat operations began immediately. The enemy on Terra Prime was described as local insurgents, with possible Xeno support, offering little clarity about their capabilities or intentions. Our mission was to conduct patrol sweeps through suspected enemy territories, identifying hostile positions and eliminating resistance where encountered. The first patrol was scheduled for the morning after my arrival. Sergeant Corvain delivered a concise tactical briefing as we prepared equipment and conducted final weapons checks. The area of operations spanned roughly 20 kilometers of broken terrain, where reconnaissance units had reported enemy activity. Our objective was to confirm their presence and engage targets of opportunity. I checked my Lazarful with the automatic precision ingrained by 6 weeks of training. Clean, loaded, safety engaged, spare power pack secured. The weapon felt as natural as breathing, an extension of my body. My field pack, water supplies, medical kit, entrenching tool, and other gear were equally familiar, their purposes drilled into memory. The squad moved out at 500 before dawn's light could expose us to enemy observers. We advanced in standard formation, scouts ahead, main body following, rear guard securing our back. Communication was minimal, conducted via hand signals to avoid audio detection. Terra Prime's landscape was harsh and unforgiving. Rocky outcroppings offered cover but funneled movement into predictable routes. Sparse vegetation provided little concealment. The terrain favored defenders who could establish positions with clear fields of fire, forcing attackers to cross open ground. 3 hours into the patrol, first contact came. Automatic weapons fire erupted from concealed positions 200 meters ahead, forcing us to scramble for cover among rocks and scrub. The sound of live rounds, unlike training simulations, carried a lethal edge. Sergeant Corvain's voice crackled through the vox with calm authority. "Contact front. 2 or 3 automatic weapons. Corporal Thane, take your fire team left and flank. Squad, suppress the firing position until the flanking element is in position." Crouched behind a boulder offering decent cover, I observed muzzle flashes marking the enemy's position. I engaged with aimed fire, the las rifle bucking against my shoulder, sending energy pulses toward targets I couldn't clearly see. Training had made the act automatic. The firefight lasted about 10 minutes. Corporal Tane's flanking maneuver forced the enemy to abandon their position, leaving behind equipment and bloodstains suggesting casualties from our suppressive fire. We advanced cautiously to clear the area, prioritizing security over speed. The abandoned position showed signs of recent occupation, but no bodies. Blood trails led into terrain offering ample concealment, indicating wounded enemies had been evacuated. We collected their equipment, documented the contact for intelligence, and resumed the patrol. I had fired at human targets for the first time, possibly killing or wounding people whose faces and motives I'd never know. The act felt neither triumphant nor traumatic, just necessary for mission success and squad survival. Training had conditioned me to act without emotional interference. The patrol continued for 6 more hours without further contact. We thoroughly covered our assigned area, noting suspected enemy positions and potential approach routes for future operations. The mission met standard success criteria, and we returned to base with valuable intelligence. That evening, Sergeant Corvain conducted a debrief, analyzing our performance and pinpointing areas for improvement. My conduct in the firefight was deemed satisfactory, meeting the baseline for new soldiers without endangering the squad. I had become functionally competent, able to perform duties with minimal supervision. Patrol operations settled into a daily rhythm, morning briefings, equipment prep, movement to assigned areas, enemy engagements, tactical responses, return to base, evening debriefings. The pattern echoed factory work, consistent execution of practice skills to exacting standards, where errors could mean failure or death. Combat normalized through repetition. The initial shock of enemy fire gave way to instinctive responses: loading, aiming, firing, reloading, moving, coordinating, treating wounded. These actions became as mechanical as feeding plastile into a pattern generator. After 2 weeks, casualty replacement became necessary. Private Kellum was killed by sniper fire during a routine sweep, a smoking hole through his chest, felling him instantly. I helped carry his body back to base, following procedures that handled remains with military efficiency, not sentiment. His effects were collected for his family, his tags sent to regimental headquarters, and his equipment cleaned and reissued. The next day, a replacement arrived. A young woman from a Hive world's industrial sectors, her name unknown to me, assigned as a rifleman and Vox operator. She mirrored my own uncertainty from weeks earlier, aware her survival hinged on quick learning with little time for guidance. Her hesitancy was evident, movements not yet automatic, responses delayed. During her first patrol, she nearly compromised our position by activating the Vox on the wrong frequency, creating noise that could have alerted enemy monitors. The error was corrected swiftly, but it underscored the vulnerability of new soldiers. She died in her second week, killed by an improvised explosive device during a routine movement. Shrapnel tore through her torso, causing fatal trauma. I applied field medical training, but her wounds were beyond saving. She died calling for her mother, a face she'd never see again. Another replacement arrived the next day. The cycle continued with mechanical precision, reducing deaths to administrative tasks. Soldiers died, new ones arrived, operations pressed on. I began to see survival as largely random. Skill and training offered some edge, but death struck the careful and careless alike, veterans and rookies, heroes and cowards. Enemy weapons didn't distinguish based on competence or courage. They killed whoever was in their path. This realization shifted my approach. I maintained procedures and equipment standards, but abandoned the illusion that perfection ensured survival. I functioned as part of the squad, accepting each patrol might be my last. The war on Cathara Prime dragged on without resolution. Territory changed hands frequently, Imperial forces advancing in some operations, withdrawing in others. Victory and defeat lost meaning, replaced by the mandate to fight until ordered otherwise or death intervened. Supplies arrived irregularly, ammunition, rations, replacements, sustaining unit effectiveness. News from other fronts, often grim, spoke of defeats, retreats, or lost worlds, the enemy's nature and motives unclear. The war's vastness dwarfed our role, too insignificant for strategic impact. After 2 months, I was notified of a promotion to acting corporal, pending additional training. The selection stemmed from survival, not exceptional skill, as experienced soldiers grew scarce. The role brought more responsibility but little change in routine. I lead a 4-soldier fire team, coordinating movements and making tactical decisions that could save or doom them. My team included 2 recent replacements and 1 soldier with 8 months service, a veteran by current standards. We operated as a subunit within the squad, handling reconnaissance, flanking, and specialized missions. The new soldiers looked to me with the same desperate hope I'd once shown Sergeant Corvain, believing experience could be taught before it was needed. I offered what guidance I could, knowing no instruction guaranteed survival. The war ground on through seasons irrelevant to soldiers in underground shelters, fighting over meaningless terrain. Time was measured by patrols and casualty reports, not calendars. The past was prior firefights. The future, the next briefing. Letters from home arrived sporadically, carrying news from a world growing foreign. The factory now produced weapons, not goods. Former co-workers had been conscripted into other guard units, their fates unknown and likely unknowable. The life I had once lived belonged to someone else entirely. I wrote no letters in return. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be censored by military authorities, and no one remained who could understand what I had become. The worker who had stood at Station 47 was dead, replaced by a soldier whose existence was defined solely by the demands of warfare. Winter brought shifts in enemy tactics and higher casualty rates among Imperial forces. Hostile forces exploited snow and ice, which reduced visibility and limited air support, making ambushes more frequent and deadly. My fire team shrank to 3 after Private Kelly was killed by artillery during a withdrawal operation. His replacement lasted 6 days before succumbing to wounds from a firefight that gained 50 meters of worthless ground. The next replacement survived 3 weeks, long enough to become useful, before a sniper's bullet ended his contribution. The mathematics of attrition were relentless. Each operation cost irreplaceable lives, while the enemy seemed to replenish endlessly. The strategic situation deteriorated steadily, with Imperial forces clinging to positions through desperate defenses. In late winter, orders arrived for our company to join a major offensive to break enemy resistance in our sector. The operation, involving multiple guard regiments, armored units, and airstrikes, was the largest on Cathara Prime in over a year. Preparations were exhaustive, detailed briefings on enemy positions, terrain studies, coordination with support units, and equipment inspections. Every effort was made to ensure success, but we all knew the cost would be measured in lives, possibly our own. The night before the offensive, I wrote a letter to no one, recording thoughts and observations that felt worth preserving, though no one would read them. It described the experience of being drafted, trained, and thrust into a war where the Imperium viewed humans as expendable resources in conflicts too vast to comprehend. The offensive began at dawn with a 30-minute artillery barrage meant to neutralize enemy defenses. Smoke and debris filled the air, obscuring visibility while, we hoped, destroying hostile positions. As the bombardment lifted, infantry advanced across terrain reduced to craters and rubble. My fire team moved with the company's main assault, following practice procedures while adapting to unexpected obstacles and enemy responses. Initially, the attack progressed well, with lighter resistance suggesting the artillery's effectiveness. The enemy counterattack struck when we'd penetrated 2 kilometers into their territory. Hidden positions, unscathed by the bombardment, unleashed overlapping fields of fire, catching us in exposed areas with minimal cover. The planned advance dissolved into a desperate fight for survival. Pinned down by fire from multiple directions, I took shelter in a shell crater as enemy rounds swept the area. The Vox carried chaotic reports of casualties and shifting unit positions, revealing an operation spiraling into disarray. Orders conflicted, positions were captured, then lost, and casualties mounted without progress toward objectives. The battle raged all day, with Imperial forces unable to advance, but unwilling to abandon hard-won ground. As night fell, the decision was made to consolidate positions and resume the attack at dawn, assuming surviving units retained enough strength. Overnight, enemy infiltrators slipped through our lines, seizing key terrain. The renewed assault faltered early, with leading elements taking heavy losses that crippled their offensive capacity. By midday, the offensive was canceled, and surviving units were ordered to withdraw under relentless enemy fire. Casualty evacuation required multiple trips across exposed ground, with medics and stretcher bearers taking losses to recover the wounded. The final casualty report revealed the regiment had lost 37% of its strength, for no lasting territorial gains. Enemy positions remained intact, bolstered by captured Imperial equipment and intelligence. My fire team was no longer a functional unit. All 3 members were killed or wounded, leaving me the sole survivor. I was reassigned to a composite fire team cobbled together from other decimated squads. The war's intensity dropped as both sides recovered. Patrols resumed on a limited basis, but major offensives were delayed until reinforcements could replace unsustainable losses. The front stabilized along lines, offering no strategic advantage. Sporadic mail brought news from a world increasingly alien. The factory I'd worked in now produced ammunition for weapons like mine. The irony registered, but held no weight. I realized the war would grind on indefinitely, consuming soldiers at a steady rate without achieving resolution. We were components in a machine whose purpose was its own perpetuation, not victory. This understanding brought neither despair nor acceptance, only a hollow recognition of existence in the emotive first millennium. The Imperium required warfare to sustain itself, and warfare demanded soldiers. Individual lives were fuel for a fire that had burned for 10,000 years and would burn long after we were gone. Spring brought new offensive preparations and fresh conscripts to replace winter's losses. The replacements mirrored my own arrival a year earlier, uncertain, undertrained, hoping to learn survival before it was too late. I offered what guidance I could, knowing most would die within weeks. The cycle was mechanical. Civilians became soldiers. Soldiers became casualties. New civilians filled the gaps. The war machine converted human potential into unattainable strategic goals with perfect efficiency. I no longer recalled what Marcus Kellion, the factory worker, had hoped or feared. That person belonged to another lifetime, erased the day his name was called for conscription. The soldier who remained bore the same name, but none of the same aspirations. The next offensive was set for early summer, when weather would favor mechanized operations and air support. Intelligence indicated enemy reinforcements, but Imperial command trusted superior firepower to prevail. We prepared with the same thoroughness as before, equipment cleaned, tactics rehearsed, coordination verified. Everyone knew success would demand sacrifices, possibly our own. The night before the attack, I lay in my shelter, listening to an army preparing for battle. Weapons loaded, equipment secured, soldiers whispering prayers to the Emperor or forbidden gods. The sounds were as familiar as the factory's machines had once been. I reflected on the morning my life ended and my service began. The transition had felt abrupt then, but now I saw its inevitability. The Imperium needed soldiers, and I had been available. My factory life had merely prepared me for this moment when my existence would be offered to needs beyond comprehension. the attack would come at dawn. Some would survive to fight again. Others would join the countless dead who had served before us. The war would continue, fed by conscripts processed across the galaxy. I checked my Lazraful one last time, clean, loaded, familiar in my hands. It was the most vital tool in my existence, the instrument of my service to the Emperor and the Imperium. In the distance, artillery pieces were positioned for the dawn barrage, their shells crafted in factories like my old one, by conscripts like me. The cycle was complete, linking every facet of Imperial life to the eternal demand for war. Dawn was hours away, but I could hear the enemy moving, preparing for our assault. They would fight with the same desperate efficiency we brought. Both sides battled for survival in a conflict serving purposes beyond understanding. This was what it meant to be drafted in the 41st millennium, to be chosen for a service that consumed everything you were, replacing it with something useful to the Imperium's insatiable hunger for war. The process was efficient, necessary, and merciless, indifferent to hopes or fears. The Emperor protects, we were taught, but protection came only through service, and service meant surrendering your life to something greater. The factory worker I had been was dead. The soldier I had become would likely die soon. Yet the Imperium would endure, sustained by an endless stream of conscripts who would learn and accept what I had. In the darkness before dawn, listening to the sounds of approaching battle, I finally understood what I had become. Not a person with hopes and dreams, but a function in a system that turned lives into strategic outcomes. The realization brought no peace, only the recognition that peace was a luxury the 41st millennium could not afford. The war would continue. It always did.